Hello you guys and welcome back to my channel. Today I am doing a bit of a Q&A. I have been getting loads of messages recently with a load of questions, mostly about my work as a midwife and how that all works, people who are considering becoming a midwife, people who are really seriously kind of looking into their training and have questions. So I have gone through my Instagram, my website, contact form messages and everything else that I have received, and I have written down a load of questions that I'm going to answer for you guys today. I really hope you guys find it useful. If you have any more questions, please leave them in the comments below or send me a message through Instagram or through my website. All the links are in the description below. So these questions are in a completely random order. They are just in the order that I found them on my phone, wrote them down, and I'm going to answer them as best I can. So the first question is, do you work every weekend? No, I do not. Obviously the NHS is a 24-hour service. 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. The NHS is open and midwives are ready to look after people. Obviously babies don't get the memo that it is Christmas or that it is a weekend, so babies are always being born and midwives are always going to be needed to be at work. However, I don't work every weekend, and nor do most midwives unless they obviously want to. Obviously it depends on who does your rota and how many hours you are contracted to. My contract is, since going back to work after having Evie, I've gone back on a part-time contract, so I am on 24 hours, which means I do 2 shifts a week. So because of that, I work probably 1 or 2 weekends a month. And that could be a Friday night, that could be a Sunday day, but I work probably 1 or 2 weekends a month. If I worked full-time, and thinking back to when I worked full-time before I had Evie, I probably worked 2 weekends a month. But when I say working the weekend, I don't mean the whole weekend, I mean working a shift on the weekend. And you do get pay enhancements for that. So the NHS will pay you extra for working a night shift or working a weekend or a bank holiday. So if you work a Saturday or a night shift, then you get paid your normal hourly rate plus 30%. And if you work a Sunday or a bank holiday, then you get your normal hourly rate plus 60%. It does, yes, you do work some weekends, you do not work every weekend, but you also get compensated for working those weekends. Will I be working more than I'm off due to all the pressures on midwives? No. So your contract will be full-time, part-time, however many hours you are contracted to work, and that will divvy up into the number of shifts you work. So for example, I work 24 hours, which is 2 shifts a week. If you work 36 hours, that would be 3 shifts a week. So although midwives are in high demand and the NHS and the news and everything is always talking about short staffing with midwives, you will only ever have that number of shifts that you are contracted to work on your rota. There are extra shifts out there that you can do, but no, you will not be working more than you are off unless you choose to do the extra shifts, but you will only be working the number of hours that are in your contract unless you choose to do extras. Next question, do I have to do extra shifts? No. So I mentioned, I think in my update video, which if you haven't seen, I will put a little link up here. I think it was that video that I mentioned that I've been doing some extra shifts. That is not something you have to do, and I would really labour that point, because I think burnout in the NHS is so huge. You do not have to do extra shifts. I have been doing it because I reduced my hours when I went back to work after having Evie, and I wanted to try and bring in a little bit more money while still having the control of when that shift would be. So I work my normal 2 shifts, and then the other shift I can pick. So it works differently in different trusts. With where I'm working now, it's all on an app. You go on and whatever shifts are available as extras are there, and you can choose to book it or not. So I can have a look and say, oh, there's a shift available on Wednesday, and I can book that shift if I choose to do so. But no, you do not have to do extra shifts. It is a way of topping up your pay, but you don't have to do it at all. How is it being back at work? I have been back at work now 7 months nearly, and I love it. I went back to a new workplace, so that has been a big adaptation, meeting a new team, getting used to new guidelines. Obviously midwifery itself is very similar, but each hospital does things slightly differently, uses slightly different, maybe slightly different drugs or slightly different concentrations of things. So learning what this trust does differently to my previous trust has been a bit of a learning curve, but I am loving being back at work. I love my job, so it's been really lovely to be back. And for some people, their whole identity is about being a mum. For me, I love being a mum so much, but I also love being a midwife. And so going back to work has enabled me to do both of those things, and I feel very lucky to do that. Obviously it comes with its challenges, things like childcare and the expense of childcare, which is a whole other issue. But yeah, I'm really loving being back at work. I actually really like doing the part-time hours and then picking the extras. The team at my new trust are amazing, and kind of feels like I never had any time away. But yeah, really enjoying being back. Is Evie sleeping any better now? So Evie's sleep has always been an issue. Her sleep is actually getting better, I think, touch wood. We're probably averaging 1 to 2 wakes a night now. We were going through a phase about a month ago where it was quite a lot better than it ever has been. She actually was quite regularly doing 1 wake, and some nights not doing any wakes. So I'm not entirely sure what's happened to cause the shift away from that. We're still quite strict with her schedule. She does sleep better when we are strict with her schedule, so we are sticking with that. So yeah, she is sleeping better. It comes with its challenges because she has never slept well, so I'm hoping at some point she will, but we will see. What shifts can you work as a midwife? I would say, from my experience, probably 95% 12-hour shifts. If you work in a clinic, then you can work shorter shifts, but I would say 95% of hospital-based shifts as a midwife, you are going to be working a 12.5 hour shift. You have a contract to a certain number of hours, as I've mentioned, and then you work those shifts. So for me, I'm contracted to 24 hours. I work 2 shifts a week. They are 12.5 hour shifts. They start at 7:30 in the morning and finish at 8 o'clock at night. And yeah, they're long, but actually I quite like the long shifts because it means I go to work less, and I think that helps with the work-life balance thing as well, because I'm not going to work 3-4 days a week, I'm going to work twice a week. But yeah, mostly 12.5 hour shifts, days or nights. Obviously there are areas that you can do shorter shifts, particularly in things like antenatal clinic, which is mostly 9 to 5, or working in the community again, which is mostly 9 to 5 or similar 8 till 4 kind of hours. Do you have any control over what shifts you are given? I touched on this a bit before when I shared my Rota as a newly qualified midwife, which actually, if you are interested in what your Rota could look like as a full-time midwife, I will link the video up here because it actually gives you examples of my Rota. But yeah, you do have some control. You get requests each month. How many hours you are contracted to and where you work depends on how many requests you get, but generally it's about 50% or just under of the shifts that you are contracted to work. So for me, I do 2 shifts a week. I get 4 requests a month. So that could be requesting I want to work the day, or I want to work the night, or I want that day off. Generally it gets honoured. Obviously they can't always accommodate for everyone's requests, but yeah, generally the requests get honoured. Can you do fixed shifts? So yes is the answer to that. I wouldn't say they are very common in terms of doing an entirely fixed rota. If everyone had a fixed rota, I imagine most people probably wouldn't work every single weekend, so they'd then end up short on the weekends. However, flexible working is a huge thing in today's society, and the NHS and the trusts that you work at will have a flexible working policy. So for myself, going back to work, trying to negotiate shifts and childcare is a complete minefield. And so I have 1 fixed shift a week. So I work 2 shifts a week. One of them is completely changeable. Obviously I use some requests to try and make it fit with my childcare, but I work 1 fixed day every single week that fits with my childcare. So that is a set day that is definitely going to be in my rota every single week. And that's part of the flexible working policy so that I can look after my daughter. But it could also be so that you can be in a netball team, or you know, it doesn't have to be because you've got children. I was always under the impression, when I was newly qualified, I was under the impression that flexible working contracts were only for people with kids. And actually I have seen that they are more commonly used for people with kids, but it doesn't have to be because you've got children. Flexible working is about work-life balance. So it doesn't have to be so that you can sort your childcare. It could be because you want to join a netball team, or because you want to do a book club, or whatever. It's about flexible working. So yes, you can do some fixed shifts. I haven't really come across anyone who's got a completely fixed rota, unless it is something dictated by their occupational health. So it might be that they have something that means that they have to work certain hours on certain days or something. How does it work with annual leave in the NHS? So annual leave is allocated to you. You get X amount of time over the course of the year and you book it in. Each trust seems to vary slightly from my experience on how far in advance you need to book it. Where I used to work, you had to book it really quite far in advance to kind of guarantee anything. Where I work now, it seems like you can request it, you know, maybe a few months in advance. Obviously the rota comes out 6 to 8 weeks in advance, so you can't then say, oh actually I want that week off, because your rota's already set and they've done it so that they've got safe staffing in the hospital. So you wouldn't be able to do that, but you can book it a bit shorter notice than say a year in advance or 9 months in advance. It's the end of April now, so I could probably book something May, June, July. I could probably book something for August or possibly the end of July and be absolutely fine to book that. Whereas in previous trusts that I've worked at, you probably wouldn't have been able to do that. You get an entitlement and you book it, but sometimes with the NHS you have to book it a bit further in advance. Payment, so what band do you start as? When you qualify as a midwife, you are a band 5. When it comes to actual pay, I would say Google it, because the pay rates will change. My video on what a newly qualified midwife gets paid, which I will link up here, obviously that video came out a good few years ago now, and I was talking about my own personal salary as a newly qualified midwife, but those figures are completely out of date now. So I would say if you're interested in the actual amounts, Google it, because it is public forum, it's public money. So what a midwife gets paid, you start as a band 5, NHS band 5, and you work as a band 5 for about a year to 18 months until you have completed what they call a preceptorship program. So that is where your learning and development is supported on the job as you finished your training, but you still need a bit of support to establish those skills and to get used to working on your own. So you work a preceptorship, you get skills and things signed off, and then once you have completed that preceptorship, which generally involves working in several different areas, once you have completed that preceptorship, which is about 12 to 18 months, you then become a band 6. And band 6, like any band in the NHS, has several levels in it based on experience, and you work your way up those levels the longer that you work in the NHS in that role. Could I book a holiday for during my training? So this was a message I received for someone who has got a place on a course starting I think in September, and she wants to book a family holiday and wants to know if it would be kind of frowned upon to book it for during the course. This course is absolutely, your attendance is compulsory. You have set weeks. I think it's 6 weeks a year. So I think it's 3 weeks in the summer, 2 weeks at Christmas, 2 weeks at Easter that you have holidays. Otherwise your attendance is compulsory unless you are sick. So you cannot book a family holiday. It would be frowned upon. You would probably, you know, it's not something that you can do. You have to attend the course because you have to learn the skills. It's not like a standard uni course where you can kind of rock up to the lectures or not. You have to be there. You can't take a holiday during your training, unfortunately. It's a commitment, and it also, you know, you've kind of got to view it like a job, because that's what you're aiming for at the end of it. It's a vocational course, so you can't book a holiday for during your training unless it is in your holidays. I book a year out after qualifying, or would that be detrimental? So this is someone who wants to take kind of like a sabbatical. She wants to do her training. She wants to then take her family on a year's traveling, which obviously sounds lovely. What I would say is, if it's immediately after qualifying, that might not be the best time to do it. Obviously you can always do things like that, but after qualifying, you are then in a position where you're about to do your preceptorship. You want to consolidate those skills that you've just spent 3 years learning. You spend 3 years working with a mentor, a supervisor. You're not on your own. Once you qualify, you are on your own. If you take a year out at that point, you still will have never been on your own, and you won't have done any of it for a year. So I would say, from personal experience, I do think it would be detrimental. I think taking a year out is a long time from the very end of your training until when you start working as a midwife. What might be better is to either take a shorter trip, you know, maybe do a few months, or to do it once you've done your preceptorship and then take it, because you've then worked for a year to 18 months as a midwife. You've really consolidated those skills. You've got everything signed off. You really, you know, feel like you've embedded yourself in the job and you vaguely know what you're doing. Obviously there's always going to be things that you're learning, and you are constantly learning on this job, but it helps you consolidate those skills that you've learned. So I would say that would probably be a better way of doing it. Any interview tips? So this was a message I received today from someone who has an interview tomorrow, so it might miss being able to be a tip for you, sorry. Interview tips, I would say be yourself is the biggest one. So do your research, make sure you have read up on things, particularly kind of current issues in midwifery. Really do your research and read up on those things. But at the end of the day, anyone can read up on those things, and they need to know that you have the potential to be a good midwife. So that is not, I know how to do a blood pressure, I know how to palpate a uterus. That is, I am a caring person, I have the potential to learn, I am compassionate, I have XYZ relevant experience. So I would say for your interview, try your hardest to show who you are and why you would be a good midwife. Be yourself. Hard as it is, try not to doubt yourself. Interviews are really hard. I think I might try and do a video on interview tips, because I do think they're really, really hard. But yeah, try and be yourself, and I wish you the best of luck. Final question. Once you qualify, can you pick where you work? So this I have found to be a really varied thing depending on where you work, in terms of which hospital you work at. Which hospital you work at, by the way, you can pick. You interview, you apply for a job at X hospital, you either get the job or you don't. So yeah, in terms of where you are geographically, yes, absolutely, you can pick that. You choose which hospital to apply to. If you get the job there, you work there. In terms of area, this is different depending on which trust you work at. It seems to vary across the country as to whether you can be kind of a core midwife in an area. What I mean by core is that you stay in an area. Most midwives, I would say probably nationwide, are what we call rotational, where you work for maybe 6 months on delivery suite, and then you work 6 months on the postnatal ward, and then you'd work 6 months on the antenatal ward, and then 6 months in the triage, and then whatever. You rotate around, and it might not be 6 months, it might be 3 months, it might be 4 months, it might be a year. You are very much a rotational midwife. You work everywhere. Once you have done your preceptorship, most midwives continue as rotational. However, some hospitals have teams that are their core teams, so they stay on the postnatal ward or they stay on delivery suites, and they become specialists in that area. So that is to support more junior midwives, that is to support students, that is so that there's someone to ask if you are new to an area and you are a rotational person. You can say, this person works here all the time, they know what the guideline is on XYZ. So can you pick where you work? In some hospitals you can, and you can choose to be core somewhere. You would have to apply to be core in that area. There's probably going to be an interview process. In other places you can't, and you would be rotational, but maybe those rotations could be extended. You might be able to request where you want to rotate to, or unofficially you could request to stay in an area a bit longer. It's really difficult because it seems to vary. Everywhere I've worked is different in that respect. Yeah, it's difficult. I think what I would say is as you become more experienced, you are more likely to be then specialising in an area and becoming more skilled in an area, and it may well be in the trust and the hospital's best interest to keep you in that area where you are a bit more specialised. And obviously if you become a band 7 in an area, then you will stay in that area. If you become a specialist midwife, for example, bereavement or diabetes or whatever, you will work in the areas that are relevant to that. I think that kind of answers that question, but it's a really difficult question to answer. That is all that I have written down in terms of questions. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you found it useful. If you have, please like and subscribe. If you have any more questions, please leave them in the comments below. I really hope you've enjoyed this video, and I will see you very soon for the next one.